Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the heart of Chinatown's neon veins, where dragons sleep in alleyways and names carry more weight than guns. There's a man known on the streets as Shrimp Boy, and if you think the nickname softens him, think again. He's quiet, small-framed, always half-smiling, but behind those eyes, decades of hustle, betrayal, and the fine art of becoming whoever the world needs to see. Raymond Chow's story is not your typical mob tale. It's not all suits and shootouts. This one slips through immigration papers, whispers across banquet tables, and ends up blinking under courtroom fluorescents. And trust me, you probably wouldn't survive a week walking his path, let alone a lifetime of switching masks to match the moment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Raymond Chow is 8 years old the first time he watches someone bleed out on concrete. It's not a gang fight or a hit. It's a domestic fight. Over nothing, really. A man yells, a woman yells louder, then something sharp flashes in the streetlight. Chow, barefoot and barely visible behind a stack of crates in Hong Kong's Kowloon district, doesn't blink. He doesn't move. He just watches as if the chaos outside is weather, and he's simply waiting for it to pass. That's how he learns early. Violence isn't a plot twist. It's background noise. By 10, Raymond is running errands for street men whose names never get spoken above a whisper. They like him. Quiet, small, fast. He can slip between stalls in the market, carry messages folded into cigarette packs, deliver cash tucked in candy wrappers. The world he's entering doesn't require explanations. It requires obedience, a strong stomach, and the ability to disappear just before the police show up. His mother tries. She sells herbs in the corner stall. She burns incense every morning. She prays louder when her son stops answering questions and starts coming home with envelopes and bruised knuckles. At 12, Chow is already in deep. The Hop Sing boys, an offshoot of the Hong Kong Triads, have noticed him. They see what the streets see: loyalty, courage, and a dangerous kind of stillness. There's no ceremony at first, no secret blade across the palm, just a nod, a small errand that turns into a slightly bigger one. And then, one day, a jacket that fits too well. The moment he puts it on, the world shifts. Not the world outside, but how the world sees him. Older kids don't push. Cops look twice. Shopkeepers either nod respectfully or pretend they didn't see him at all. They call him Hajai, Shrimp Kid. It should be an insult, but it becomes his signature. A quiet joke, hiding a quiet threat. One of the enforcers once says, "Shrimp Boy's the kind who'll smile while you sink." Raymond doesn't correct him. By the mid-1970s, Chow's family uproots to San Francisco. A move meant to save him. Instead, it simply transfers him to a different battlefield. Chinatown, SF, isn't the postcard version of dragons and lanterns. It's layered with tension. Beneath the tourists and tea shops, there are rival tongs, loyalty networks, and a hunger to control the city's undercurrent of gambling, extortion, and debt collection. Raymond, now a wiry teenager with a scar across his left eyebrow, enters high school with 1 foot in the classroom and 1 foot in a Chinatown pool hall where business is conducted over mahjong tiles and half-finished bowls of soup. He's not the loudest, never is. But when a local kid owes the wrong people money and disappears, Raymond is the one they send to knock on the family's door. not to hurt them, just to remind them. His presence is enough. That's the beginning of his new image. A messenger whose eyes hold consequence. Historical fact time. In the 1970s, San Francisco's Chinatown was home to several active tongs, many of which trace their origins to 19th century immigrant support networks. But by the late 20th century, these had become deeply entangled in organized crime. Raymond doesn't inherit this world. He adapts to it, bends around it, learns its rhythms until he can see a lie in the way someone lights a cigarette. The next few years move like a fast shuffle. Chow earns respect, not through brute force, but through poise. The kind of poise that unsettles people. He rarely raises his voice, rarely repeats himself, and that calm, it makes him dangerous. Because when you don't yell, people lean in to listen. And when you don't blink, they wonder what you're hiding. By 19, he's firmly within the network. Chinatown elders start calling him the young one with old eyes. Many people still think that his rise was accidental, a product of timing, opportunity, and lucky proximity to power. But that's too simple, don't you think? So what do you think? Could a kid with nothing really maneuver this far just by chance? One evening, in the back of a smoky karaoke bar, a man 3 decades older than him hands over a worn ledger. No instructions, just a look. Raymond flips through it. Numbers, names, balances, and nods. He doesn't need context. He knows what to do. Later that night, he walks past a Chinatown mural painted with dragons and golden clouds. He pauses, just for a second. The air smells like fried garlic and fog. He adjusts the collar of his jacket, then disappears down a narrow alley with no street sign. Just another night, just another calculation. Raymond wakes up to the smell of rice steaming and oil popping in the kitchen, but his mind is already on the streets. His mother, tired but stubborn, tries to coax him into finishing school, but Chow knows that algebra and history won't pay rent or settle debts. The alleyways outside his window whisper louder than any classroom lecture ever could. By the time he's out the door, Chinatown's morning hum has already begun. Delivery trucks rumbling, old women bargaining for bok choy, and kids darting through puddles left from last night's fog. He spends the morning moving between storefronts where back rooms operate like small kingdoms. Each shopkeeper knows someone who owes someone else a favor, and Raymond, quiet, polite, but unnervingly sharp, becomes the go-between. He doesn't even realize how much trust he's earned until one of the older gang members calls him little brother in front of everyone. It's a simple phrase, but in this world, titles are earned, not given. Raymond learns the rules of survival quickly. Never ask twice. Never take the first story you hear. And always remember who watched your back last time things went sideways. By the time the sun dips behind the hills, he's already put in a day's work chasing down debts and carrying messages that sound like casual conversations, but are anything but. There's a moment one evening that shapes him more than most. He's standing by the entrance of a gambling den, just a skinny teen in a hand-me-down jacket, when a man storms out after losing too much. The man curses, waves his hands, threatens to call the police. Raymond doesn't flinch. He simply steps forward, tilts his head slightly, and says nothing. The silence is heavier than any threat. The man stops mid-sentence, stares, and walks away. That's when Chow realizes his quietness can be a weapon sharper than any blade. Mainstream historical fact. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, San Francisco's Chinatown was a hot spot for underground gambling and loan sharking operations. The city's authorities often struggled to infiltrate these tightly knit communities, where trust was built on family ties and decades-old codes of honor. Chow thrived in this environment, not just because he could fight, but because he could read the invisible lines that others missed. By 18, Chow is spending less time at home. His mother knows she's losing him to something bigger, something darker. He tries to make her feel better by buying her small gifts, a new teapot, a silk scarf, but the money always smells faintly of cigarettes and risk. He doesn't tell her that he's started collecting debts personally, that he's seen the way fear changes people's posture, the way they lower their eyes and reach for hidden cash when they see him coming. One night, he's asked to join an initiation for a new member of the Hop Sing Boys. Chow isn't being initiated. He's there as a witness, a sign that he's already trusted enough to watch someone else take the oath. In a dimly lit room, incense smoke curls upward while men speak in low, deliberate tones. There's a ceremonial blade, a drop of blood, and a vow of loyalty. It's both frightening and intoxicating to watch. Chow doesn't flinch when the blade draws blood. Instead, he studies every movement, every expression. He knows his time will come. By the early 1980s, his reputation is no longer confined to one corner of Chinatown. People start calling him Shrimp Boy more frequently, not as an insult, but as a name that carries weight. He's the kid who doesn't back down, the kid who can walk through a crowded market and have people instinctively step aside. Do you remember the day he first left with real money in his pocket? He was maybe 16, and he carried that envelope like it weighed 100 pounds. That night, lying in his tiny bedroom, he thought about what it meant, not just the cash, but the power it represented. It was the first time he realized he might not need to take orders forever. Many people still think that Chow's early rise was pure luck, that any kid in his position would have made the same moves. But can luck really teach you when to stay silent, when to smile, when to push just enough to get what you want without burning bridges? So what do you think? Was it chance or was it instinct? By the time he turns 20, Chow's face is familiar to almost everyone who matters in Chinatown's underworld. He knows which bars are neutral ground, which alleys to avoid after dark, and which back rooms hold the conversations that shape the entire neighborhood. There's a rhythm to this life, and he's learning to dance to it better than anyone else his age. One rainy evening, standing under a red neon sign that flickers like it's trying to keep a secret, Chow takes a long breath and realizes something. He's no longer the boy hiding behind crates. He's the one people hide from now. Raymond Chow isn't built like the men who raised him in the street's shadow. He's slight, narrow-shouldered, barely brushing 5'5" even with the thick soles of his boots. But it doesn't matter. No one mentions his size anymore. Not if they've seen him work a room. Not if they've ever watched how someone 3 times his weight still steps aside when Shrimp Boy enters. The name, once whispered in mockery, has become a badge of strange honor. Shrimp Boy's the one who smiles when you're panicking. Someone jokes over dumplings, but the laughter is clipped, like no one wants to say it too loud. He's a contradiction, soft-voiced, polite, even charming when he wants to be. But under it all is a tension, a razor behind the silk. Chow has learned something most men never do. You don't have to raise your volume to make the room fall silent. That's his gift. And gifts like that get noticed. By 1983, he's being brought into larger conversations, not just muscle work or debt collection, but decision-making. Business talks cloaked in casual dinners, coded language exchanged over clinking glasses. He sits beside men 20 years older than him, listens more than he speaks, and when he finally does offer a thought, it's always something that makes someone nod slowly, then change the plan. Historical sidebar. The 1980s saw a surge in Asian American gang activity across the West Coast, particularly among newly arrived immigrants struggling for identity and power in marginalized communities. In San Francisco's Chinatown, the battles weren't just over territory. They were about control of narratives, about whose name echoed longest in the night. Chow understood this better than most. You could take a block with fists, but you held it with story, reputation. That's why he began dressing better, moving differently. He'd show up to low-level meetings in pressed suits, always just a little overdressed for the room. He understood the power of suggestion, of posture, but make no mistake, beneath the polished shoes and watchful eyes, Raymond Chow was still dangerous. He carried a blade in his boot, knew how to use it, and never walked a block without scanning the windows above. Trust, in his world, was currency that depreciated quickly. There's one night that cements his image, at least among those paying attention. A young enforcer from a rival tong makes a comment, loud, disrespectful, meant to provoke. It happens in a crowded tea house, full of noise and clatter. Raymond doesn't even turn. He continues sipping his drink for several full seconds, sets it down, and finally stands. No shouting, no warning. One open palm to the face, quick as breath. The rival hits the ground hard, more surprised than hurt. Chow steps over him, says nothing, and walks out. He doesn't need to explain anything. The whole room carries the story forward for him. That's the real power. Not the act, but the echo. Inside the Hop Sing network, his legend starts to grow. Older leaders, many of them hardened men who came from bloodier wars, begin calling him nephew. Not in a familial way, but as a term of investment. They see something in him. Longevity, adaptability. Many people still think that these triads were just about drugs, gambling, or violence. But so what do you think? Could someone like Chow have risen without mastering diplomacy, reading moods, knowing when to trade loyalty for leverage? By 1984, Chow is overseeing operations that stretch beyond Chinatown. He's making connections with Bay Area outfits, traveling to Los Angeles, even exchanging greetings with Vietnamese and Cambodian street crews forming their own networks in San Jose. Every handshake, every exchange, another thread in his growing web. He begins to experiment with the gray zone, that space between legitimate business and the underground. A small import-export company opens under his cousin's name. It sells household goods. On the surface, it's clean, but within a month, it's also moving untaxed cigarettes and counterfeit phone cards. The books look solid. The shipments come through a quiet dock in Oakland. It's smooth, too smooth. And here's a fun one. He once hosted a karaoke competition as a fundraiser for a local youth program. Gave a short speech, handed out trophies, smiled for pictures with city council reps. Meanwhile, one floor below, a game of high-stakes pai gow unfolded, complete with guards and a stack of unmarked bills. No one connected the two. That was Chow's genius. Separate faces for separate rooms. But it's not all perfectly choreographed. There are mistakes, deals that go sideways, a courier van that doesn't make it back, a cousin who gets too loud after drinking too much. Raymond handles each with precision, sometimes by smoothing things over, sometimes by letting silence stretch long enough to become its own sentence. Do you remember the time he walked into the seafood shop and everyone just paused? It wasn't scheduled. No meeting was planned, but Chow stepped in, nodded at the owner, and walked slowly to the back room. The men playing cards there, hardened, older, armed, didn't even hesitate. They stood. One even tucked his pistol deeper into his waistband, like he was embarrassed. Raymond simply said, "I'm here for my 10%. No one argued. They just reached for the drawer. Even as he's building his empire, Chow isn't careless. He keeps things compartmentalized. No phones used twice. No handoffs without a fallback. And always, always, someone watching his back from a distance. Not to protect him, to enforce his message. By the end of this phase in his life, Raymond isn't just another Triad kid. He's become a kind of ambassador, a figure. People greet him carefully, use two hands when shaking his, offer food before conversation. It's not superstition, it's survival. The funny part? He's still not 30. The Hop Sing boys don't have a glossy brochure or a recruitment office. There's no handshake under a flag, no diploma on the wall. But when they invite Raymond to his true initiation, the real one, not just being a helpful messenger or a polite enforcer, it feels unmistakably sacred. It's late. Not midnight, not dawn. That in-between hour when even the fog seems unsure of its weight. Raymond is told to come alone. No weapons, no phone, no second pair of eyes. He obeys. Not because he's scared, but because he knows. Trust in this world is a test scored silently. He's led to a room above a seafood distributor, a place he's passed dozens of times, never suspecting what lay above. Inside, it's warmer than it should be. Incense clings to the walls, smoke curling around the old calendar pinned beside a single red lantern. There's a low table, no chairs. 3 men sit on floor cushions, their expressions unreadable, like wax masks carved by time and cigarette smoke. They don't introduce themselves. They don't have to. The ritual is quiet. No ceremony for the sake of drama. It's the silence that makes it sacred. Raymond is asked only one question. Are you loyal to the brothers who stand beside you in shadow? He answers yes. A blade is unsheathed. Not big. Not even flashy. Just a small fold knife, the kind you'd use to cut fruit. One of the elders takes his finger, pricks it, and lets a single drop of blood fall into a cup of rice wine. Raymond drinks it. The wine is warm, sharp, a little bitter. But he doesn't flinch. They hand him a red envelope. Inside, a jade pendant, a packet of cigarettes, and a single playing card, the 9 of diamonds. It doesn't need explanation. It means, keep your head down, your cards close, and your blood colder than theirs. Historical context. In traditional Chinese secret societies, symbols like the red envelope or a specific playing card often held deeply personal meaning within the organization. The 9 of diamonds, in some circles, was thought to represent betrayal or misfortune, a reminder of how thin the line was between fortune and ruin. From that moment on, Chow isn't just in. He's one of them, not by accident, not by birth, but by choice. After the ritual, they eat, quietly. Bowls of soup, warm buns, pickled radish, not a word spoken. Just the sound of slurping, of chewing, of distant traffic fading into early dawn. There's something ancient about it, and Raymond feels it deep in his chest. Not nostalgia, but connection. This isn't about violence. It's about continuity. About inheritance without paperwork. When he walks out of that room, back into the San Francisco mist, he feels taller. Not literally, of course, but inside. There's more weight to his name now. A different kind of gravity when he moves through the day. Many people still think that initiation into a Tong is dramatic. Flames shouting, kung fu music in the background. But so what do you think? Isn't the scarier version the one wrapped in silence and ritual? The one where your choice binds you not through fear, but through lineage? Raymond starts making moves differently after that. He's no longer running errands. Now he's setting routes, assigning tasks, smoothing conflicts before they ripple into full war. When two younger members get into a fistfight over a card game, Chow doesn't raise his voice. He just pulls one aside and whispers something. Just a few words. The kid turns pale and leaves the city for a month. It's not that Chow is violent. It's that no one is quite sure how far he's willing to go to maintain balance. And that uncertainty is far more terrifying than a loaded gun. He starts frequenting a restaurant on Jackson Street, not because the food's incredible, though the dumplings are decent, but because it becomes his neutral ground. People come to see him there, sit across from him, ask for favors. He rarely gives answers on the spot. Come back in 3 days, he says. And somehow, by then, he already knows what to do, and he never uses a phone. That's a rule. Messages are always face-to-face or passed through trusted runners. He believes that if your voice is bouncing between towers, it's no longer yours. Do you remember the old tailor on Grant Avenue? Most people thought he just stitched suits for tourists. But once a month, Raymond visited him. Never said much. Just handed over a white envelope, picked up a new pocket square. The tailor never made eye contact, but his ledger kept track of who owed what and when. In a world of encrypted texts and burner phones, sometimes the most analog solution was still the safest. By now, the name Shrimp Boy has gone from a Chinatown nickname to a Bay Area signature. Cops know it. Journalists whisper about it. Community leaders pretend they've never heard it. Still, Raymond keeps his image clean. He shows up at charity dinners, donates to local schools, speaks about youth empowerment. He's invited to cultural festivals, applauded for giving young men an alternative to gang life. And ironically, they're not wrong. He does offer an alternative. It just comes with fine print no one reads. He once told a reporter, off the record, "I used to break things with my hands. Now I fix them with a handshake." That line made it into a few speeches from Chinatown politicians. No one realized how deeply layered it was, and beneath all the layers, Chow is still keeping score. Who owes him? Who's pretending not to? Who's too comfortable? Because comfort, in his book, is the beginning of carelessness. And careless people attract heat. And heat? Well, heat ruins empires. The boat that carried Raymond Chow from Kowloon to California might have been metaphorical, but the weight it bore was real. When his family immigrated, the idea was simple. Leave behind the dark alleys of Hong Kong, the Triad whispers, the ceiling fans that spun over backroom threats. Start over. But you don't shake that kind of past just because you change time zones. Chow didn't land in a clean world. He landed in San Francisco's Chinatown, where the dragons just wore newer clothes and spoke with borrowed English. The same rivalries, the same power games, the same need to belong. Only here, it was layered under American bureaucracy and framed with golden takeout signs. By the late 1980s, Chinatown wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a system, a place where generations of immigrant labor, resistance, tradition, and crime bled together. The older Tongs had lost their edge. The younger gangs were filling that vacuum. It was less about political refuge now and more about muscle, territory, and who had the cleanest books for their dirtiest deeds. Chow, still barely into his 20s, moved through that maze like a ghost. He wasn't loud, didn't leave bodies behind him, didn't even flash wealth like the younger hotheads who bought leather jackets and new cars with the first payout they touched. He was careful, calculated, and that made him indispensable. His rise didn't come from violence, it came from mediation. He started showing up when disputes threatened to boil. A delivery truck shorted on a payment. Chow smoothed it over before fists flew. A gambling debt about to turn bloody. He offered a restructuring plan that kept both parties quiet and in business. He was like the city's underworld accountant crossed with a diplomat, but the man wasn't naive. He knew kindness in this world wasn't its own reward. It was credit. And credit has a due date. One night, in a karaoke bar beneath a Vietnamese restaurant in the Tenderloin, he brokered a truce between a Chinatown crew and a visiting gang from LA. The room smelled of soy sauce and cologne, the kind of cologne that clung to cheap gold chains and tension. Chow spoke softly, translated between dialects, and made sure everyone left with their egos intact. Afterward, one of the visiting lieutenants pulled him aside and said, "You ever think about moving south? You'd own this whole block in a month." Chow smiled. "I already do," he said, sipping green tea. Historical note: the 1980s saw an increase in cross-regional cooperation between Asian American gangs, especially those in California. These alliances weren't always peaceful, but for savvy operators like Chow, they offered expansion without bloodshed. Back in San Francisco, he was consolidating his influence not through fear, but familiarity. He was everywhere, at weddings, funerals, storefronts, parades. He remembered names, asked about mothers, gave small red envelopes to the kids. He was a presence, not a shadow, but a glow. It was during this time that he also began investing in face. Not literal surgery, but image. He dressed better, walked straighter, learned to pose for photographs in ways that made him look approachable, but not soft. He studied local politicians, the way they moved through crowds, the way they answered questions without actually answering anything. Many people still think that organized crime figures are allergic to the spotlight. But so what do you think? In a world full of noise, isn't silence suspicious? Chow learned that blending in didn't mean hiding. It meant mastering the performance. He started mentoring younger gang members, not just in operations, but in perception. "Never wear sunglasses indoors," he told one. "It makes people think you've got something to hide. You don't need to look tough. You need to look in control." It was advice straight out of a corporate handbook, if that handbook was passed hand to hand through smoke-filled rooms. He also began exploring legitimate fronts: a printing company, a seafood supplier, a tutoring center that opened 2 doors down from a massage parlor where, coincidentally, a few missing persons once owed money to the wrong guys. None of the businesses flourished, but they weren't meant to. They were shields, receipts, stories for the IRS. "Do you remember the charity gala in '89? He showed up in a 3-piece suit, donated $5,000 to a local housing initiative, and left before dessert." The mayor shook his hand. A state senator posed with him for a photo. Not a soul in the room realized that just 12 hours earlier, Chow had personally resolved a standoff over weapons inventory miscounts that could have left 5 people dead in a warehouse near the piers. Even the police couldn't pin him down. They watched. They followed. They even bugged a few locations. But Chow was meticulous. He never said more than he had to. Never put himself at the center of any transaction. He was the pin holding the operation together. But if you pulled the pin, it vanished before you even knew it was loose. And when one of his closest lieutenants was arrested, Chow didn't panic. He sent flowers to the man's family, paid for a lawyer, waited. The message was clear. Loyalty isn't an act, it's a system. You reward it, you protect it, and above all, you never appear surprised when it's tested. By the end of the decade, Chow was living in a modest house with a front garden. Nothing flashy, just enough to say, "I'm doing okay." His mother had moved in with a cousin by then. She stopped asking questions, stopped praying out loud. When they met, she hugged him tightly but never asked where he'd been. That was their understanding. Love without interrogation. Chow, now in his mid-20s, was a fixture. Not just in Chinatown, but in the entire Bay Area's underground map. His nickname still followed him, but it no longer sounded small. It sounded final, familiar. The way a signature sounds when it lands on the bottom of a contract, sharp, precise, quietly binding, and somewhere inside, he started asking himself a question he didn't yet have the answer to. What happens when you climb so high that the only place left is down? Rain slicks the pavement in Chinatown, and neon reflections puddle like old memories. Familiar, distorted. Raymond Chow walks beneath the flickering lanterns, alone but never unobserved. By now, he doesn't need escorts. Eyes follow him without invitation, not out of fear, but out of muscle memory. People make room. Conversations lower. Chopsticks pause midair. It's not that he commands the moment. It's that the moment reshapes around him. It's 1991. Chow is 28 and the city has changed. So has he. He wears better suits now, darker ties, Italian leather instead of street sneakers. His voice is deeper. His laughter, when it comes, is slower, more measured. Even his silences feel heavier, like they've matured with time. And while the young guns swagger in matching bomber jackets and brag about their connects, Raymond watches quietly from the corners of banquet halls and VIP rooms, sipping tea as if measuring the temperature of the room with each glance. He's not just a name anymore, he's a symbol. But symbols draw attention, from allies, from rivals, and now from law enforcement. The FBI has had an open file on Chow since the late 1980s. Nothing concrete, rumors, whispers, a few suspicious financials, but they can't stick anything to him. Not yet. He's smart, insulated, always 3 steps removed from anything illegal. His fingerprints are never on the ledger. His voice is never on the line. His name is always in the air, never on the paper. That changes with a heroin deal gone sideways in 1992. Raymond didn't organize it. He didn't even touch the product. But someone in his orbit, someone hungry, sloppy, too eager to rise, lets his name drop during an undercover conversation. And that's all it takes. In this world, one name in the wrong sentence is enough to start a file, authorize a wiretap, get a judge to nod solemnly while signing a stack of subpoenas. One morning, Chow is woken not by his alarm, but by a dozen federal agents on his front lawn. The raid is surgical. They tear through his house, flipping drawers, unsealing safes, poking through bookshelves like they expect the walls to confess. Chow sits calmly in his robe, watching them, sipping tea from a chipped ceramic mug. No panic, no outbursts. Just a raised eyebrow when they seize his computer and one of them trips over a decorative fountain. He's arrested. The charges are vague enough to confuse the press, but sharp enough to hold him. Conspiracy, racketeering, suspicion of drug trafficking. The press photos show him handcuffed, but straight-backed. His expression is unreadable. a face carved from stone and silk. Mainstream historical fact. In the early 1990s, federal agencies significantly ramped up their investigations into Asian American organized crime, particularly targeting figures in San Francisco and New York. These operations were often built on long-term surveillance, wiretaps, and plea bargains from lower-ranking gang members. Raymond is sent to prison for a term that surprises no one and satisfies no one. His enemies think it's not enough. His supporters think it's too much. He says nothing. Inside, he adapts quickly. Federal prison isn't a new jungle for him. It's just a new ecosystem. And he's always been a fast learner. He keeps his head down at first. No sudden movements. No declarations of rank. But within weeks, it becomes clear. This man is different. He listens more than he talks. He never complains. And he always knows the guard schedule before anyone else. It doesn't take long before people begin approaching him. For advice, for mediation, for protection. He doesn't give orders. He just asks questions that somehow make people change their minds. Do you remember that story from the kitchen crew? A guy from another gang, young, full of noise, tries to cut in line during lunch. Chow just looks at him, doesn't even speak. The kid laughs, makes some joke about seafood and short people. The next day, his tray is missing. The next day after that, he's transferred to a different unit. No one admits to anything. But the staff start addressing Chow a little more carefully. Even in prison, he doesn't fade. He recalibrates. He spends time reading, mostly books on psychology and Eastern philosophy. He becomes fascinated with balance, strategy, restraint. It shows in his demeanor. He's calmer, slower to react. He speaks more in parables than commands. One inmate calls him the monk. The name doesn't stick outside, but inside, it's gospel. Many people still think that prison breaks men, that it erodes their edge. But so what do you think? What if it sharpens the parts that can't be seen? Years pass. Chow gets out in 2003. The world outside has moved on. Faster, noisier, flooded with technology and surveillance. Triads now use encrypted messages. Street kids don't know who he is. But he doesn't mind. He doesn't come back to reclaim a throne. He comes back to rewrite the script. Publicly, Raymond Chow announces he's done with crime. He tells reporters he's reborn, and he starts appearing at community events again. But this time, there's no pretense of mystery. He smiles in photos. He joins public anti-gang efforts. He even lectures at high schools. It's the cleanest face he's ever worn. And the city? It wants to believe him. The narrative is just too perfect. Reformed gangster returns to mentor at-risk youth. Local leaders applaud him. Civic organizations welcome him. Even the media runs flattering stories. From Triad to teacher reads one headline. Behind the scenes, though, there's friction. Some old associates feel betrayed. Some rivals think it's a trick. Others are just confused. Was this the same man who once orchestrated extortion with a single glance? But Chow stays steady. His public persona becomes bulletproof until whispers begin to stir again. About meetings held in locked tea rooms, about envelopes exchanged under tables, about a new network forming. Not a gang, per se, but an advisory circle with influence over small businesses and community affairs. The line between reform and reinvention starts to blur. And Raymond? He never denies the whispers. He just keeps smiling. If you pass Raymond Chow on the street in 2005, you'd think he's a civic leader. He walks with the careful rhythm of a man who knows cameras might be watching, even if none are visible. He wears dark suits now, tailored but not flashy. with lapel pins gifted by non-profits and handshake deals. His hair's slicked, his posture impeccable. He shakes hands like a mayor and listens like a monk. But Chinatown remembers, not everyone buys the transformation. Some see through the speeches and polished press photos, past the charity drives and youth workshops. They remember the boy who once stood motionless as a rival bled on the pavement. They remember the silence he used as a weapon. But times have changed, and so has Raymond, or so it seems. In this new life, he reinvents himself as a Tong elder, but not the type hiding in shadowy mahjong dens. No. Chow becomes the public face of the Gi Kong Tong, one of Chinatown's oldest fraternal organizations, originally founded to support Chinese immigrants fleeing poverty, famine, and political unrest. Historical fact. The Gi Kong Tong, also known as the Chinese Freemasons, has roots dating back to the mid-1800s. Though many Tongs began as mutual aid societies, over time, several gained reputations for criminal activity, blurring the line between cultural heritage and street control. When Chow becomes dragon head of the Gi Kung Tong, it feels ceremonial. There's a banquet, photographers, speeches in both Cantonese and English. He poses with city officials. A local supervisor calls him a shining example of rehabilitation, and perhaps he believes it too. He takes meetings with school principals, sponsors dragon boat teams, donates laptops to after-school programs. In public, he speaks against gang violence with conviction. He says, "I want these kids to be scared of prison, not think it's a step in the right direction." It's the kind of quote that headlines like, but beneath the surface, old patterns hum like a quiet engine left running. Do you remember the building on Clay Street? 3 stories, red awning, always smelled faintly of incense and printer toner. That was his base now. Upstairs, they held cultural meetings and language classes, but if you timed your arrival late enough, past the last student, past the flickering lights, you might find a different crowd. Men in sharp collars and softer shoes, conversations held in corners, agreements made without signatures. People begin to murmur, "Is this a front?" But Chow keeps smiling. He invites inspectors in, shows clean books, offers them tea. They leave empty-handed, slightly embarrassed. One afternoon, he's spotted having dim sum with a former associate, a man recently released from prison, known for extortion. Reporters ask. Chow waves it off. "Old friends reconnecting," he says. Everyone deserves lunch. He becomes the kind of paradox cities don't know how to handle. Too clean to arrest, too smooth to ignore, and his legend only grows. Many people still think that the best criminals hide. But so what do you think? Isn't it smarter to blend so deeply into the community that your name gets attached to charity galas and scholarship funds? Shrimp Boy isn't hiding anymore. He's waving, but the law hasn't forgotten. Behind closed doors, the FBI watches closely. They track his bank activity. They tail his car, mark every place he dines, logs who enters and leaves the Clay Street building. They still can't pin anything on him, but patterns start to emerge. Too neat to ignore. A restaurant on one corner suddenly pays off long-standing debts. A construction permit gets approved faster than it should. A rival organization's president resigns under pressure and disappears to Vancouver. None of it ties directly to Chow, but none of it happens outside his gaze either. Do you remember that council meeting? The one where he was honored with a Community Achievement Award? He took the stage in a dark blue suit, thanked the mayor, smiled modestly. The crowd clapped, but in the back of the room, an agent watched, scribbling notes. That same week, a confidential informant gave the FBI a lead. "It's not a gang anymore. the man said. "It's a network, clean on the books, but if you owe them, you pay, one way or another." Chow hears the whispers, of course. He always has. But he doesn't run, doesn't flinch. Instead, he starts leaning into his clean image even harder. He invites journalists to his office, takes photos with school children, hosts a Lunar New Year banquet for police officers. Every gesture another thread in his carefully woven veil. Still, there's something different now. Something in the way he glances over his shoulder in public, or pauses just a little longer before answering certain questions. He's a master at hiding fear, but not even masters are flawless. There's an old phrase in the Tongs, "He who stands tallest attracts the wind." Raymond Chow is standing very tall, and the wind is starting to rise. Federal prison doesn't age a man like years on the outside. It ferments him. For Raymond Chow, the time inside didn't strip him of power. It clarified it, removed the noise, stripped away the distractions, left only the core strategy. So when he walked out years ago, shaved and steady, it wasn't rebirth. It was revision. But the old world never really leaves. And by 2006, as he begins carving out his public persona, the FBI isn't the only one circling. Rivals who once assumed Chow was finished start whispering again. He's too visible, some say. Too polished. Others scoff. He's soft now, just wants to play elder statesman. But the streets don't forget precision, and precision is what Raymond built his name on. Still, something begins to shift. A newer generation of gang leaders is rising, louder, more reckless. They carry pistols like business cards, post photos online, mistake visibility for strength. They don't remember the quiet way Chow once cleared a restaurant with a look. They think power lives in the number of likes or the sound of a Glock's click. And Raymond? He watches, doesn't comment, doesn't correct, just nods, smiles, vanishes into the fog of Grant Avenue with a quiet sense of inevitability. Then comes the incident with the Vietnamese crew. It starts small, a nightclub dispute over protection money. One of the younger Gi Kung Tong affiliates roughs up a bartender, stupid, impulsive, avoidable. But the bar owner has ties to a Vietnamese group operating out of the East Bay. Within a week, retaliation follows. A broken window, a threat scribbled on an envelope, a name whispered with a bullet under a car seat. Raymond steps in, not because he's ordered to, but because Chinatown still bends a bit when he leans. He invites both sides to a private dinner. No weapons, no recording devices, just chopsticks, hot tea, and quiet conversation behind a locked curtain in a seafood banquet hall. The meal is tense. The room smells of steamed crab and unfinished vengeance. Chow listens. He barely speaks. Then, after dessert, he clears his throat and says, "If we spill blood in public, the whole street bleeds, and the police won't ask who started it. They'll just come for the loudest name. So eat the crab, shake hands, and leave your pride in the parking lot." And somehow they do. No one's sure why. No deal was inked. No payments exchanged. But the feud dissolves like sugar in hot soup. That's how Chow still operates. Subtle force, like pressure applied by silk gloves. Mainstream historical fact. By the late 2000s, law enforcement noted that many traditional organized crime figures were operating through intermediaries, using community organizations and cultural nonprofits to preserve influence while evading direct involvement in illegal activity. Chow's ability to navigate both sides, legitimate and illicit, becomes the stuff of Bay Area legend. Many people still think that power needs to shout. But so what do you think? Isn't the most dangerous leader the one who never raises his voice? Meanwhile, his reputation continues to blur. Some call him a gangster turned reformer. Others call him a fraud cloaked in charity. And in the middle of it all, Raymond remains composed, perfectly content to let perception do the heavy lifting. But beneath the surface, he begins rebuilding something older, a network not built on violence, but on obligation. A former restaurateur gets a loan to reopen. A bail bondsman receives a mysterious investor. A struggling import business suddenly finds smoother customs clearance. None of these lead back to Chow on paper, but his name is spoken softly behind every door that opens where it should have stayed closed. Do you remember the florist shop? The one with the red awning on Washington Street. It never had customers, yet somehow stayed open year after year. Every week, a different man stepped in, spent 5 minutes inside, left with an empty bag, and every month, like clockwork, a community center in Chinatown received a generous donation, always in cash, always anonymous. The florist never sold a single bouquet, but it moved influence like it was water, and yet, Raymond is still visible, still showing up at schools, parades, council meetings. He shakes hands with the very people investigating him, and no one flinches. He plays the game so well that even when they know, they still smile. But not everyone's smiling. Inside the Gi Kong Tong, tension brews. Younger members, less patient, start questioning his methods. They want action, territory, control. They think Chow's reformed image is a leash, not a shield. One of them, a sharp-tongued kid from Daly City, says, "Shrimp Boy's scared now. He's hiding in public." Chow hears this. Of course he does. But he doesn't respond. Instead, he invites the young man to lunch, orders tea, doesn't touch his food, and for 20 minutes, just listens. When the kid finally stops talking, Chow smiles, thanks him for his ideas, and pays the bill. 2 days later, the kid's car is pulled over in Fremont. Inside, unlicensed weapon, small stash, counterfeit bills. He's arrested. No one connects it back to Chow, but no one questions him again either. This is the game now. Subtle pressure, gentle reminders, delicate subtraction. He's not trying to be king. He's trying to be untouchable. But the problem with living between worlds is this. You can't stay balanced forever. And somewhere in a federal office, a man is reviewing transcripts, audio files, photographs, watching Chow smile as he hugs a schoolchild, then watching a known associate vanish off the grid days later. The net is tightening, and Raymond? He's already adjusting his tie. Raymond Chow never needed a stage. The rooms simply adjusted when he walked in. But by 2008, the rooms were changing. The audiences were younger, more skeptical, and the law was listening closer. But Chow had something better than fear. He had timing. He knew when to appear at fundraisers and when to vanish into the folds of Chinatown's back alleys. He knew when to hug a city official in front of cameras and when to whisper a warning in a corner booth no microphone could reach. His influence had shape, but no outline. You couldn't arrest a shrug or convict a suggestion. Still, in the quiet halls of the FBI's San Francisco division, his name sat underlined on a whiteboard. They didn't have him, but they wanted him. One agent called him the Velvet Ghost. He left no fingerprints, just intentions. So they waited, watched, wiretapped, dug deeper. They weren't after a drug bust or a gun charge. They were building something bigger. And Raymond? He kept hosting community dinners. One in particular, spring 2009, was held at a Chinatown banquet hall. Lanterns overhead, roast duck, red envelopes for scholarship recipients. Chow posed with 5 city officials that night, all smiles, all unaware, or pretending to be, that downstairs, in a smoky basement, a different kind of meeting had unfolded hours earlier. In that basement, A man from Nevada, a handshake too long, a briefcase with unspoken terms, nothing written down, just nods, tea, and the kind of eye contact that makes paper unnecessary. Historical fact. Around this time, federal investigations began shifting focus from traditional criminal offenses to racketeering cases under RICO, targeting the structure of criminal organizations, not just the individuals. Informants became gold mines, and surveillance turned digital, spanning continents. Chow could feel it, the air thickening, the old rules dissolving. The streets were no longer governed by silence alone. Now, phones betrayed you. Emails followed you. A single photo out of context could turn into Exhibit A. The world was wired, and the walls, once safe and soundproof, had ears, so he adapted again. No more closed-door deals. Everything above water, or at least above the smoke line. Public speaking gigs, anti-gang panels, visits to juvenile detention centers. He gave speeches about the trap of violence and the illusion of fast money. And the kids listened. Not because they believed him, but because they wanted to. He even co-founded a nonprofit. Its slogan? Tomorrow starts with honor. The logo was clean. The website updated weekly. Even the IRS records looked legitimate, and donations? Steady. Suspiciously steady. Do you remember the real estate project? On the edge of Chinatown, a rundown lot suddenly changed hands, twice in 1 month. By summer, a community development initiative took over. The sign outside read, "Coming soon, affordable housing for all." But construction never began. Instead, the address became a mailbox hub. 38 separate business registrations in a single space no bigger than a noodle shop kitchen. Raymond never signed a document, never appeared on any deed. But the project's lead consultant was a man Chow once called his spiritual nephew at a dinner party. Coincidence or choreography? Many people still think crime is a matter of who pulls the trigger. But so what do you think? What if the real power lies in who knows how to move the safety? By now, the FBI had moved from curiosity to certainty. They just didn't have the link, the tape, the voice. They had shadows. They needed weight. And then, finally, it came. A man named Keith Jackson, former school board member, political fixer, middleman, desperate for money, and willing to talk. He didn't offer evidence. He offered access. Through him, they began weaving a different web. Not just Raymond Chow, the community leader, but Raymond Chow, the connector, the broker, the man who didn't move money, but moved people, arranged introductions, suggested favors, hosted meetings, always 2 seats back from the deal, but always present. Jackson introduced undercover agents to figures circling Chow, pretending to be businessmen, gun runners, investors, and every so often, someone dropped Chow's name. "He's good with logistics," one said. "He's got old ties in Asia," another offered. And slowly, the feds began to build their architecture. Still, Raymond didn't crack. Not directly. No handoffs. No bribes caught on camera. Just dinner conversations and political chatter. Nothing the courts could chew on. And yet, the net kept tightening. The government was betting on RICO now. All they needed was to prove that Chow sat atop an organization that coordinated criminal enterprise. The crimes didn't need to be his. They just needed to orbit him. So the FBI launched Operation White Suit, a long, slow burn targeting Chow and his alleged inner circle. They embedded agents, wired informants, recorded every blink of suspicion. And Chow? He was busy receiving an award for outstanding community leadership. That's the paradox, isn't it? He was both target and trophy, both ghost and guest of honor. A man no longer holding a gun, but still casting the kind of shadow you can't step around. Do you remember the Chinatown parade that fall? Raymond stood on a float beside the police chief. He waved to children, tossed candy into the crowd. He wore a crimson silk jacket that shimmered in the sun. And somewhere in that crowd, smiling back, was the agent assigned to destroy his empire. The thing about long games is, they lull everyone into forgetting they're even being played. And for a while, it looked like Raymond Chow had actually pulled it off. By 2010, he wasn't just tolerated, he was applauded. A reformed gangster, a cultural figure, a redemption story Chinatown could rally around. News articles called him a model of second chances. He spoke at city colleges about violence prevention. Local artists painted murals with his face on them, eyes narrowed, calm, almost saint-like. But behind the serenity was pressure building like steam in ancient pipes. The FBI had planted its seeds carefully, and now they were watering them. In the months following the parade, more meetings happened. Some staged by undercover agents, others initiated by intermediaries linked to Chow. Every interaction was scripted in their own way. The agents asking open-ended questions, the associates dropping vague but suggestive language, always circling the perimeter of something dirty without ever naming it. Raymond, if he noticed, didn't let it show. He still met with city officials, still took photos with high school honor students, still handed out red envelopes on Lunar New Year with thin smiles and heavy eye contact. And still, somehow, none of this registered as contradiction. That's the art form Chow had mastered, making dissonance sound like harmony. But then came Leland Yee, California state senator, respected, connected, fluent in both politics and backdoor negotiations, and crucially, ambitious. The FBI had begun surveilling Yee for unrelated corruption concerns. What they found instead was a string of interactions linking him, however loosely, to men in Chow's orbit. And then, as if on cue, Keith Jackson, the fixer, began bragging to the wrong people about being able to broker deals between arms dealers and politicians. And who was always near? Always 2 degrees from the transaction. Shrimp Boy. Now, federal attention reached a fever pitch. Operation White Suit went into overdrive. Agents posed as gun traffickers, money launderers, overseas buyers. They dropped hints about weapon shipments, about campaign donations with expectations. They asked questions like, "Who can make this quiet?" And more than once the answer was, "Let me check with the Chinatown side." They never said Chow's name outright, but they didn't need to. It was like calling the rain by watching the clouds. Do you remember the hotel room meeting? A suite in downtown San Francisco. Neutral ground. Agents posed as arms buyers. Keith Jackson was the bridge. There was talk of securing weapons from overseas, maybe even a connection to militant groups in the Philippines. And the name Shrimp Boy was dropped, casually, like a code word no one wanted to define. They taped everything. Still, Chow never appeared in the room. He was like a ghost on the periphery, never touching the gun, never passing the envelope, never using a name. But his presence was felt, referenced, revered. Many people still think that guilt is about direct action. But so what do you think? Can you run an empire without touching the blade? The federal prosecutors thought so. By 2012, a grand jury investigation was in motion. Quiet, sealed. Every month, more names added. More hours of recordings stacked. Chow's voice finally showed up. Once, twice, never admitting, but never denying. Just laughter, agreement in tone, and silence where protest should have lived. The problem was no one wanted to believe it. His supporters, Activists, teachers, community leaders insisted it was a witch hunt. "He's turned his life around," they said. "He's done more for this neighborhood than the last 5 mayors combined." One op-ed even compared him to Malcolm X. Another called him a cultural phoenix, but the agents were unmoved, because facts don't need applause. Meanwhile, Chow seemed to double down on his transformation. He made more donations, gave interviews, talked about starting a memoir, spoke at an anti-trafficking conference. Yes, that trafficking. The irony was almost poetic. And then came the call, March 26, 2014. Before sunrise, federal agents swarmed 30 homes and offices across Northern California. Among the names arrested, Leland Yee, Keith Jackson, and Raymond Chow. Shrimp Boy was taken from his home without incident. No fight, no raised voice, just a slow nod, as if he'd been expecting it. Maybe he had. The press had a field day. Guns, politics, and a reformed gangster. All crash in San Francisco, one headline read. Another called it the Chinatown Sting. Chow's face was everywhere again, but this time not in murals, in mugshots. Mainstream historical fact. The FBI's Operation White Suit resulted in a sweeping federal indictment that named 29 individuals, including Chow and Senator Leland Yee. Charges ranged from racketeering to arms trafficking and public corruption. The case shocked California politics and drew national headlines. In custody, Chow released a statement. "I am innocent. This is political theater," he said. "I've dedicated my life to peace." It was short, direct, too clean to be spontaneous, but the indictment told a different story. It painted Chow not as a reformed man, but as a criminal mastermind hiding behind a community suit. It laid out a network of alleged crimes, laundering, bribery, even murder-for-hire conspiracies. And at the center of the web, one constant figure, calm, careful, connected. The charges weren't just about what he did, they were about what he enabled. Do you remember the footage of him in court? He walked in wearing a pale blue jail uniform. No jewelry, no smirk, just that old, unreadable calm. His hands folded in front of him. Not defiant, not defeated. Just there. The courtroom didn't blink. Raymond Chow, the boy who rose from back alleys to banquet halls, who spoke of honor and redemption, was now on trial for orchestrating the very violence he swore to end. And the question hanging in the air wasn't just, is he guilty? It was he ever not? It's a strange thing, watching a courtroom fill with people who used to fear your name. But Raymond Chow doesn't fidget. He doesn't cough or adjust his posture. He simply sits, hands folded in his lap, eyes steady, as if he's waiting for a meeting to start, not for a federal judge to read his charges aloud. The courtroom is cold, too bright, sterile in a way that makes everyone feel a little guilty, even if they're just observing. Outside, the press has already decided the verdict. Headlines label him a fraud, a wolf in community leaders' clothing, a gang boss who gamed the system until it caught up with him. Inside, things move slowly. The federal indictment is thick, 49 pages of accusations, connections, phone records, recordings. It accuses Chow of running a criminal enterprise under the guise of the Gi Kong Tong, laundering money, trafficking weapons, ordering hits. Some charges date back over a decade. Others are so recent they still feel warm. And through it all, Chow says nothing. His defense attorney calls the case an illusion. He claims Chow has been targeted because of his past, not his present. They couldn't catch him then, the lawyer says, so they're trying to punish him now. Chow nods occasionally, listens carefully, but speaks only when asked. Not guilty, he says evenly. Not defiant, just flat. As if the words themselves don't quite matter anymore. Many people still think that silence is a sign of surrender. But so what do you think? What if it's the final defense a strategist has when words would only help his enemies? Over the next few weeks, the prosecution unrolls its case. They bring out surveillance tapes, grainy footage of meetings, voice recordings, briefcases exchanged in restaurants. They present testimony from former associates, men who once praised Chow's calm, but now call him the hub, the broker, the one who knew everything. The defense pokes holes. These men are criminals, they argue. They're trying to save themselves by dragging Chow down with them. They highlight the gaps, moments where Chow isn't even present, times when his name is spoken by others, but never confirmed by him. Guilt by association is not justice, the attorney says. But the pattern is hard to ignore. There's a rhythm to the evidence. Chow never pulls the trigger, never handles the cash, never signs his name. But everything moves smoother when he's in the room. Every negotiation ends when he nods. Every favor gets repaid faster after his blessing. The courtroom begins to shift. Even those who once wanted to believe in his innocence start to ask harder questions. Could someone operate in the center of so much smoke and not smell of fire? Outside, Chinatown is divided. Some say it's a setup, that law enforcement wanted a trophy and made Chow the scapegoat. Others shake their heads slowly, as if they always suspected the quiet wasn't purity. It was planning. Do you remember the old shopkeeper near the corner of Sacramento and Stockton? He's in his 80s now. He used to speak proudly of Chow, called him a young man with old manners. But after the arrest, he refuses interviews, just folds his hands and says, "You can't hang a shadow." But sometimes it's the shadow that closes the door. Meanwhile, Chow continues to maintain innocence. In letters from jail, he writes about injustice, karma, politics. He signs them with grace, sometimes including a quote from Lao Tzu or a line of poetry. To some, it's performance. To others, it's poetry. To the jury, it's unclear historical context. The RICO Act, originally created to dismantle the mafia, allows prosecutors to charge individuals as part of a criminal enterprise, even if they didn't commit every act themselves, so long as they participated in or directed the structure of the organization. And that's where they aim their arrows, not at a crime, but at a structure. One built on silent influence, backroom etiquette, and invisible strings pulled at just the right moment. By week 4 of the trial, one of the jurors asks the judge to be excused. "I didn't think it would be like this," she says. "It's not like the TV shows." She's right. It isn't. It's slower, stranger, full of inferences and smoke rings. Chow watches it all with the same gaze he used when he was 16, watching a man bleed on the concrete, unblinking, still, because whether or not he walks free, his legend is no longer his to protect. It's already moved into memory, into whispers, into the back booths of dimly lit restaurants. But he still has one card left to play. A courtroom is not a battlefield, not in the traditional sense. But make no mistake, Raymond Chow knows the war has started. It just comes dressed in suits now, draped in transcripts instead of blood. The prosecution begins painting him with broad, deliberate strokes. They don't focus on a single act, because that's not the point. They focus on presence, influence, the way people pause when his name is mentioned, the way deals seem to fall into place around him, not because he says so, but because not saying so becomes the command. They introduce charts, timelines, names, audio clips, And the phrase, structured criminal enterprise, echoes through the court like a quiet thunder. Chow sits through it all, silent as stone. If he flinches at any point, no one sees it. If he feels the noose tightening, he doesn't betray it. It's the same quiet calm he's carried since back in Kowloon, when he watched grown men collapse and never blinked, when stillness became survival. But the defense pushes back hard. They bring up community awards, testimony from pastors, local teachers, politicians who once stood proudly beside him. A changed man, they say. A man who invested in peace, who spoke at juvenile halls, who mentored youth. They argue the recordings are vague, ambiguous, that the government is leaning on association, not action. And they're right, in a legal sense. But the jury doesn't live in a legal sense. They live in human instinct, and instinct keeps circling back to the same truth. Somehow, everything passes through him. One witness, a former associate turned informant, says Chow never raised his voice. That's how you knew you were in real danger. The courtroom stirs. The prosecution shows photos. Chow at a banquet with known criminals. Chow handing out awards while one of his mentees was later found laundering money through a Chinatown nonprofit. Chow photographed at a karaoke lounge, sitting 2 tables away from a man under investigation for arms deals. Still, no direct proof, just placement, pattern, pressure. Many people still think that justice needs a smoking gun. But so what do you think? Can a man be guilty of shaping a world, even if he never lit the match? Do you remember the moment he took the stand? He didn't have to. His lawyers advised against it, but he insisted. He walked up slow, calm, wore a simple navy blue shirt under the orange jumpsuit, and when he sat down, the courtroom held its breath, not for his words, but for the weight of them. He looked at the jury, not the judge. "I was born into survival," he said. "Not leadership, not crime, just survival. You don't understand how much of your soul you have to hide just to stay breathing in my world." The courtroom was still. "I made mistakes," he continued. "I knew dangerous people. I was a dangerous person. But I changed. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But I did." His voice didn't tremble. It never does. "And you want to put me away not because I committed a crime, but because I remind you that you can't always tell who the criminals are. Because sometimes they wear suits. Sometimes they donate to libraries. And sometimes they sit right where I'm sitting now." That statement makes the front page the next morning. Shrimp Boy speaks. "I was built to survive. Some call it powerful. Others call it performance. But no one calls it weak." Still, the prosecution doesn't blink, because they have one more hand to play. A wiretap. It's not perfect. The audio's grainy. The voice is unclear. But the transcript reads enough. An undercover agent discusses a shipment. Off the books, maybe weapons. The other voice, alleged to be Chow's, says, "Keep it off the street. Clean hands. Quiet. No admission, but implication." The courtroom listens to it 3 times. Chow doesn't react. Neither do the jurors, visibly. But one of them shifts slightly in her seat the 3rd time through. A tiny movement. But enough, and then the prosecution rests. The trial has taken weeks, but the weight of it makes it feel like years. Outside, Chinatown is quieter than usual. Murals are painted over. Community leaders cancel events. No one wants to speak too loud, not until the verdict. Inside, Raymond keeps to himself in holding. He reads, meditates, writes notes. His lawyer says he sleeps like a monk. Never restless, because at this point, what's left to fear? The past is already printed. The present is already performing. And the future? Well, It's in 12 people's hands. As the jury begins deliberations, Chow watches the clouds roll by through a small window in his cell. He once told a cellmate that clouds are the most honest thing in the world, always shifting, never pretending to be something they're not. And maybe that's what this whole trial is about. Proving that he's not a cloud, but a machine. Or worse, proving that he is a cloud, but one that darkens rooms without ever leaving fingerprints. The clock ticks, the world waits, and Raymond Chow doesn't move. When the jury returns, the air in the courtroom thickens like steam before a storm. The reporters have taken their seats. The sketch artist stops shading and waits. No one coughs. No one checks their phone. Every breath is held. It's not just Raymond Chow on trial anymore. It's every memory, every myth, every whispered story told across Chinatown barber chairs and banquet halls. Chow rises when the bailiff calls the room to order. His face is unreadable, but not blank. It's the look of a man who's practiced stillness so long, it's become armor. The jury four-person stands. Her voice shakes, but not much. On count 1, guilty. She doesn't look at Chow when she says it. No one really does. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty. Count after count. The verdict lands like soft but unrelenting rain, each word sealing off a corridor of possibility. Not all charges stick, but enough do. Enough to take the myth of Shrimp Boy and tether it to a steel cell. Raymond doesn't blink. He just sits slowly, smoothing the front of his shirt, as if brushing off lint instead of the final verdict on a life lived at the edge of law and legend. Many people still think the fall of a king should be loud. But so what do you think? Isn't it more haunting when it's quiet? Outside the courthouse, the news breaks like a wave. Chow guilty in racketeering trial. Former gang leader convicted. From reformer to ringleader, social media lights up. Former allies fall silent. A few loyalists post long, looping defenses. He was a symbol, they write. He gave us hope. Others are less forgiving. He fooled us, they post. He wore our culture like a costume. In Chinatown, the impact is strange. Not loud, not even divisive, just subtle. Conversations become less animated. Some elders walk with heads slightly lower. Some shopkeepers put away the photos that once showed them shaking hands with him. Do you remember the mural off Stockton that had Chow painted in gold brushstrokes? It's quietly painted over the following week. No statement, no press. Just a bucket of gray and a pair of work gloves. As if erasing him from public memory will erase the contradiction he became. But the truth is more complicated than guilt, because even now, in the wake of the verdict, there are stories, small ones, that a local business got a silent investor and stayed afloat because Chow made a call. That a young man headed toward gang life got a plane ticket and a clean apartment in another city because Chow told someone he deserved better. Was it real? Maybe. But the problem with living as a legend is this. Your truths always arrive braided with your lies. In sentencing, the prosecutor reads from the trial summary. Mr. Chow operated as the head of a criminal enterprise masquerading as a cultural institution. He used the community's trust as camouflage. He manipulated visibility into immunity. Chow doesn't flinch. When given a chance to speak, he rises, looks to the judge, and says, "I've lived a long life in a city that never forgave people like me for surviving. I've done things I regret. I've done things I believed were necessary. You can choose to call me what you want, but I always tried to leave the room cleaner than I found it." No one's sure what that means. Maybe not even him. But the judge nods, not in agreement, just in acknowledgement. Like someone closing a book they don't know how to shelve. He's sentenced to life in federal prison. No parole. He's led away in silence. No last words. No dramatic turn of phrase. Just a man in his 50s, shackled, steady, walking into whatever version of history still has room for him. Historical record? Raymond "Shrimp Boy" Chow was sentenced in 2016 to life imprisonment without parole. The case, spanning years, dozens of defendants, and involving corrupt politicians and organized crime, remains one of the most complex and debated federal investigations into modern Asian American criminal networks. In prison, Chow doesn't fade. He studies, reads, writes poetry, files appeals, grants the occasional interview. Never confessional, always circled in metaphor. "I became what they needed," he tells one journalist. "And then they hated me for fitting the shape." He rarely speaks about the crimes. Instead, he talks about cycles, about loyalty, about the strange weight of being useful. Many people still think that a man behind bars is no longer dangerous. But so, what do you think? Isn't it more dangerous when the story survives even after the man is locked away? In Chinatown, whispers of Chow return in odd places. A toast at a wedding, a joke at a mahjong table, a sentence that begins, "Back when Shrimp Boy ran things," and trails off into the steam of a noodle shop, because Raymond Chow was never just a man. He was a presence, a contradiction, a walking parable that never quite resolved. And in the end, he didn't need to escape prison. He just needed to outlast silence. Prison, for Raymond Chow, isn't a punishment. It's just another domain to study, another system, another code to decipher. He arrives not like a man defeated, but like a man resettled. Not for the first time, not unfamiliar. And though the gates lock behind him, and the noise of clanging metal frames his days, he carries himself with the same stillness that once parted rooms like tide waters. Other inmates take notice. They call him OG, the politician, that Chinatown guy. Some know the myth, some only know the headline, but few speak to him without a mix of curiosity and caution. He's polite, predictable and routine, but you get the sense he's always 3 layers deeper in thought than whatever conversation you're having. He declines most social groups, doesn't join the Asian car, doesn't owe protection. He eats in silence, exercises at dawn, and reads more than he speaks. The guards note it. His bunkmate notes it. He doesn't retreat, but he doesn't lean forward either. It's as if Raymond Chow's still playing a game of proximity, close enough to observe, never close enough to bleed. But even in here, reputation has gravity. Letters start to arrive. Dozens at first, then more. Former supporters, enemies, strangers. A few contain confessions. A few ask for advice. One simply reads, "You were the last one who made this neighborhood feel protected, even if we didn't like it." He reads them all, folds each one, stores them in a box under his cot. And then there's the appeal. His legal team moves quickly, citing bias, alleging prosecutorial overreach. They argue that the trial leaned more on myth than fact, that Raymond was judged for what he represented, not what he did. The motion is eloquent, thoughtful. It gains traction among certain legal circles, even garners a small wave of editorial support. But it's denied. Raymond accepts it with a small nod. No surprise, no anger, just acknowledgement. As if the system finally lived up to the very nature he'd predicted all along. Mainstream historical fact. After his conviction, Chow's defense team filed an appeal arguing that excessive pretrial publicity and insufficient evidence of direct wrongdoing compromised his right to a fair trial. The Ninth Circuit Court ultimately upheld the original verdict, And so, Chow begins the next phase of his life, not as a gangster, not as a community leader, but as an institution. He tutors other inmates in Chinese history and English grammar. He meditates. He writes letters to former students and protégés, some of whom now lead quiet, honest lives, far from Chinatown. A few letters are returned, unopened, but some spark long exchanges. Pages filled with memory, remorse, and the occasional joke scrawled in the margins. Do you remember the man from the youth center? He was 16 the last time he saw Chow, at a fundraiser where Chow gave him a scholarship envelope. Now he's 32, working in tech, and sends Raymond books every few months. One of them is The Art of War. Chow doesn't laugh when he opens it. He just underlines a single sentence in red. The greatest victory is that which requires no battle. He rereads that sentence often, not because it justifies what he did, but because it explains how he survived. But even in confinement, the mythology continues to warp. Outside, in the city he once paced like a quiet storm, his story is retold and reshaped depending on who's talking. Some paint him as a traitor, someone who weaponized tradition to mask ambition. Others remember him as a man who brought calm to chaos, even if the calm was enforced through fear. And many simply don't know what to believe. That's the problem with a legacy built on contradictions. Many people still think that prison silences a man. But so what do you think? What if it only gives him more time to refine the silence? By now, Chinatown has changed. New names fill the storefronts. New alliances form, though quieter, more fractured. The old tongs are weaker, the police stronger, the city safer in measurable terms, but there's something missing in the air. Attention once held in balance by a figure no one could quite figure out. The kind of gravity you only notice when it's gone. Do you remember the florist's shop? The red awning's still there. New owners now. Real flowers this time. But some of the older customers still whisper about the past. One woman walks by every Friday and leaves a single stick of incense on the curb. She never says why. A mural reappears 3 blocks away. This one not as public. Tucked behind a shuttered building. A simple profile. Chow's face. Eyes looking out over the fog. No plaque. No signature. Just the phrase, "He held the silence others were scared to touch." Whether it's reverence or rebuke depends on who you ask. And Raymond? He just continues. In the quiet routines. In the letters. In the chess games with lifers who once ran cartels. In the soft tap of his pen against paper as he writes another line of a memoir he may never publish. He once told a guard, "People don't fear the man who raises his voice. They fear the one who makes them question their own." That quote makes it onto a sticker, then onto a street lamp near Portsmouth Square. No one knows who put it there, but everyone knows who it's about. Even in a world of walls and whispers, Raymond Chow carves out rhythm. He wakes at 4:45 a.m., sharp. No alarm, just habit, etched deeper than bone. He folds his blanket, cleans his space, washes up. Breakfast is dull, eggs powdered, toast stiff, but he eats with the precision of someone who once survived on inconsistency. Some days he walks the yard. Some days he skips it. Depends on who's out. He avoids drama, but not out of fear. More like boredom. Conflict feels juvenile now. Petty. Wasteful. He watches the younger inmates fight and sees himself, but only in outline. In this place, Chow is neither lion nor ghost. He is fixture, an unshaken pillar. He's given a job in the library, cataloging, maintaining, recommending. His reading list becomes legendary. Everything from Sun Tzu to Malcolm X, from translated Tang Dynasty poetry to thick American legal textbooks. He annotates the margins, circles words for their rhythm, not just their meaning. And then, at night, When the lights dim and the sounds of scraping trays and distant shouting die down, he writes, sometimes it's letters, to no one really. Sometimes it's memoir fragments, observations, sentences like, "When you build a throne from silence, you must expect to reign alone." Other times he simply sits on his bunk, staring at the cracked ceiling, as if watching a different version of his life flicker there. A younger him, in a sharper suit, standing at the edge of Grant Avenue, daring the fog to swallow him. Do you remember the letter he received from a Chinatown reporter? She'd written a piece on him years ago, called him the contradiction wrapped in custom. She wrote again to say she wasn't sure if she had misjudged him or judged him exactly right. Chow's reply was 3 sentences. Judgment doesn't matter as much as memory. I will always be remembered. The rest is ash. Outside, the myth keeps shifting. Some say he's a scapegoat, a casualty of image management, thrown under the federal bus so that others could rise cleaner. Others say it was always him. Always power disguised as reform. That even his change was calculated, measured to buy time and trust and deflect heat. And in a way, both sides are right. That's the real story, isn't it? Not that Chow was innocent, not that he was guilty, but that he was the perfect mirror. You saw in him what you wanted to see. A gangster, a guru, a ghost. Mainstream historical fact. Following his conviction and sentencing, Raymond Chow became the subject of multiple think pieces, podcasts, and criminal justice debates. His story was frequently used in discussions about the blurry line between reformation and reputation laundering. But inside, none of that matters. His days are slower now, his world narrower, but his mind unburdened. He once told a fellow inmate, "You don't feel trapped when you've already served time in your own legend. There's a dignity in that. Not noble, not righteous, just resolved." He speaks to almost no one about the outside world anymore. Doesn't ask for updates. Doesn't want headlines read to him. As if once the curtain dropped, he chose to stay behind it. Yet sometimes, when the lights go out and the hum of the facility softens into something almost peaceful, he closes his eyes and recalls the smell of Chinatown after rain, the warmth of ginger in the air, the rustle of paper lanterns, the way even concrete could feel sacred when walked with purpose. He doesn't regret power. He regrets the quiet it left behind. Do you remember the wind-down moment he always delayed? Here it is. Let's slow things down. Let's let the noise drift away. The verdicts, the transcripts, the contradictions. Picture a man not in chains, but in calm. A cell, yes, but also a sanctuary, a small cot, a folded blanket, the hum of fluorescent lights melting into night. Outside that room, legacy, memory, murmur, but inside, breath, the quiet kind, long and slow and patient, because that's all that's left now, quiet. And in some ways, that's what he was always chasing. Not fame, not fear, just stillness so complete that even history couldn't quite name him. So rest easy now. Let your thoughts dim. Let the questions fade. The city sleeps. The streets forget. But somewhere, in a locked room under a dim bulb, a man is still watching the shadows he once commanded, and he's smiling. Raymond Chow has spent his entire life mastering entrances. How to walk into a room without speaking. How to claim space without violence. How to let a pause say more than a paragraph. But now, in prison, the entrances are over. It's all rooms he never leaves. Yet something shifts. A year into his sentence, he's moved to a different unit. Less chaotic, quieter, older inmates, men with long stretches ahead and not much to prove. The guards don't call him Shrimp Boy. They call him Mr. Chow. Some with mockery, some with genuine respect. Either way, it doesn't rattle him. Names are clothes. You wear them until they no longer fit. He's assigned to facilitate a conflict resolution circle for younger inmates. The administration doesn't ask, just informs. They think a man like him might reach the ones headed toward the same abyss. Raymond shrugs. He's seen worse requests. At first, the younger guys roll their eyes. "What's a gang boss going to teach me about peace?" one of them asks. Chow doesn't answer. He just watches. Eventually, that same kid returns after lights out to ask if he can borrow a book. It's always silence first. In the circle, he listens more than he speaks. When he does talk, it's rarely about himself. Instead, he tells stories about a noodle shop in Chinatown where every deal began with tea and a lie. About a boy who once tried to leave the game but didn't know how. About power that tastes sweet until it poisons the tongue. He never says me, but they know. One afternoon, a young inmate, barely 20, tattoos still fresh, leans in and asks, "If you could go back, would you do it different?" Raymond pauses. "No," he says, "but I would do it quieter." The room doesn't laugh, doesn't move, just sits with that answer like a slow wind settling across desert sand. Many people still think the loudest regrets are the real ones. But so what do you think? What if the truth is shaped more by what we refuse to say? Back in his cell, letters continue arriving. A podcast producer wants an interview. A grad student asks to include him in a thesis on leadership psychology. A former rival writes a short, cryptic message. "You won the game. Did you mean to?" He doesn't respond to any of them. Instead, he writes longhand pages of personal reflection, notes to no one, journal entries that begin with quotes and end with silence. Sometimes he rewrites the same line again and again. Control is the art of absence. Some of the guards start reading his essays. Not officially, not out loud, but photocopies circulate. A few get posted in the chapel. One even ends up on the warden's desk. Chow never acknowledges it, never takes ownership. Influence doesn't require attribution. And then comes the visitor. It's unexpected. A woman in her 30s. She gives her name. Chow doesn't recognize it until she mentions her grandfather, the old shopkeeper who once called him the young one with old eyes. The man who died a few months after Chow was convicted. She sits across from him in the visitor's room. Doesn't cry, doesn't smile. "I'm not here for answers," she says. "I just wanted to see what silence looks like up close." Chow nods. "You found it." She leaves without touching the glass. Later that night, he walks the small loop in the rec yard and thinks about legacy. Not as a statue, but as an echo. Not what's carved, but what lingers. Do you remember the barbershop on Jackson? They still won't speak about him openly. But there's a new kid sweeping hair who asks too many questions. One day, the old barber points to a faded photo behind the cash register, barely visible, out of frame. "That's when things ran smoother," he says. The kid squints. "That him?" The barber just shrugs. Does it matter? Mainstream historical fact. Post-conviction, Raymond Chow became a figure in academic circles examining the intersections of race, redemption narratives, and community leadership in criminal justice. His life, complicated and controversial, challenged simple definitions of guilt and rehabilitation. Within prison, Chow has become not a leader, but a reference point. Newer inmates are warned. "You see that guy? Used to own the whole block. Didn't have to say much. Still doesn't. He's no longer feared. He's not exactly revered, but he is understood. And perhaps, in this narrow world of bars and counts and check-ins, that's a kind of peace." He writes one final note that month, a short one, just a quote. "You don't need to be remembered to be respected. You just need to walk softly, loud enough for ghosts. No signature, just folded, taped to the underside of a bookshelf. Because Raymond Chow has no more rooms left to enter, he's already filled them. The seasons change behind bars, but they don't announce themselves. There are no blooming cherry blossoms, no fog-drenched mornings rolling down Grant Avenue, no rustle of Chinatown's paper lanterns, just small shifts, sunrise angles, the way cold lingers on concrete, how the air inside the yard stiffens before it softens. Raymond Chow notices them all. He always did. Observation, after all, was his first language. He's no longer pacing power plays or measuring political silence. Now, he measures time in patterns, the rattle of lunch trays, the rhythm of footsteps, the volume of distant televisions through the vent near his cot. Yet the world hasn't fully let go of his name. Another podcast reaches out. This one slicker, big audience. Redemption or racket? The pitch reads. They want to tell his story, offer him a voice, humanize the man behind the myth. He declines, politely, but firmly. If they want the truth, he writes in a note to his lawyer, they'll need to be comfortable not understanding it, because that's the problem, isn't it? Everyone wants a tidy ending, a fall from grace, a rise from ashes, a moment where the man either confesses or collapses into martyrdom. But Chow isn't interested in either. He's more interested in equilibrium, in the concept of balance, of breath. Each morning, he practices Tai Chi in the corner of the yard. Slow movements, quiet repetition. No one joins him. They watch, but they don't mirror. It's not performative. It's not meant to be followed. It just is, and that's where he lives now, in the is. Do you remember the community center he helped reopen years before his arrest? It closed not long after the trial, but someone reopened it recently. Different name, new mural. But on the corner of a bookshelf near the office, there's a framed photo. A younger Chow handing a child a red envelope. No plaque, no context, just the image. When asked about it, the staff member shrugs. He helped the neighborhood, whatever else he was. Legacy is a splintered thing. Back in prison, Raymond starts mentoring an older inmate, someone in for tax fraud of all things. A soft-spoken man with shaky hands and a near photographic memory. They talk philosophy, language, ritual. One afternoon, the man asks, "Do you believe in karma?" Raymond smiles faintly. "Karma's like debt," he says. "It doesn't care what you believe. It collects either way." Many people still think prison is only about punishment. But so what do you think? What if it's about exposure? About seeing yourself with no applause, no disguise? There's a young guard assigned to Chow's wing. New, sharp-eyed, too eager. At first he watches Chow with suspicion. Thinks the older man might try something, might run games. But after weeks of observing, he changes tactics. One night, during cell checks, he pauses. "You were a big deal out there," he says. Chow doesn't look up from his book. "Out where? The city, Chinatown, the news?" Raymond lets the silence stretch. "I was present," he finally replies. "That's not the same." The guard never brings it up again. That phrase, "I was present," echoes in Chow's writings. It shows up in the margins of his essays. He's working on a long, handwritten manuscript now. Not quite a memoir, not quite a manifesto. It reads like a series of meditations, themes on identity, power, consequence, chapters with titles like "The Echo of Soft Footsteps," "Smoke as Legacy," "The Chair You Never Sat In." He knows it might never be published, might never leave the prison mailroom. But that doesn't matter. Writing, for him, is architecture. A way to organize the ruin into something resembling peace. Do you remember the boy from the scholarship photo? He's a man now, works in local government, quiet role, still visits his parents every Sunday. One night, during a council meeting, he votes to approve funding for a Chinatown mental health initiative. Someone asks why. He just says, "We owe the neighborhood more than judgment." Mainstream historical fact. In the years following Chow's conviction, there was a noted shift in community funding and political attention to Chinatown, both as a response to the damage done and as a way to reclaim cultural leadership without criminal associations. The ripple is real. Chow feels it, not in headlines, but in letters, in how certain books arrive, in how certain names appear again. Former allies now walking different paths. Some succeed, some relapse, some simply vanish. He never asks for updates, never writes back with advice, but he reads everything. Because even from a locked room, he remains fluent in the language of influence. He once wrote, "There's no such thing as disappearance, only people watching from different distances." That line gets quoted in a zine circulated in San Francisco's Mission District. Then again on a mural near Oakland's Lake Merritt. No attribution, just the words, white on black, under a painted image of a dragon whose tail becomes smoke. In Chow, he keeps walking the same loop in the yard, keeps reading the same pages twice, just to make sure he didn't miss anything in the spaces between. Keeps folding each letter with the care of a man packing memory into paper, because legacy is never linear. It spirals, it fractures, it waits. In the 5th year of his sentence, Raymond Chow begins to vanish, not from the prison, not from the records, but from the conversation. His name appears less frequently in newspapers. Podcasts move on. Journalists chase newer cases, louder headlines, fresher villains. The world outside does what it always does with complicated figures. It files them under too much effort and moves along. But Chow isn't bothered. He notices the fading, yes. But for him, it isn't a loss. It's a return to stillness, to the space where no one expects a move, and every silence is yours again. He walks the same yard loop each morning. Same path, same sequence. 5 paces past the fence line. Turn. Watch the shadow move along the edge of the wall. Turn again. The ritual never changes, and in that repetition, he finds something close to peace. Inside his cell, his writing deepens, not just in quantity, but clarity. His manuscript becomes more focused, sharper in its restraint. Less about his past, more about perception, more about how systems eat their symbols, and how people assign morality based on angle, not evidence. He writes, "I was guilty of knowing too much and innocent of saying too little." A simple line, but it says what years of coverage never could. One day, a new inmate arrives. Young, hot-headed. From the Bay, same neighborhood Chow used to walk. He hears the whispers, recognizes the name. On the 2nd week, he approaches during rec and asks, "Is it true you used to run Chinatown?" Raymond smiles faintly. "No one runs a place like that. You just hold the leash while the dog pretends to sleep." The kid doesn't know what to make of that, but he walks away quieter. And the next day, he sits near Chow during lunch without asking. Chow never acknowledges it, but he shifts slightly to make room. "Do you remember the envelope sent to the parole board? It wasn't a request for clemency. Chow never filed one. It was a handwritten essay, unsolicited, titled False Redemption and the Theater of the State. 5 pages, neatly written, no personal appeals, just philosophy. He ends it with, "If you need me to be the villain, I understand. If you need me to be the lesson, I decline." They don't respond, but the warden mentions it during a staff briefing. He still believes he's bigger than the narrative. Someone says, "No," the warden replies. He believes he's already beyond it. Mainstream historical fact. Chow never admitted guilt for the most severe charges against him. He maintained his innocence while acknowledging his past affiliation with organized crime, leading many to categorize him as one of the most enigmatic modern figures in federal custody. Still, he has no shortage of readers. The prison chaplain begins quoting him during reflection hours. An underground zine for lifers reprints several of his essays. One inmate even tattoos a line across his ribs. Silence is a sword when no one sees your hands. And yet, Chow remains removed from all of it. He no longer comments on the outside world, doesn't mention news, policy, shifts in Chinatown leadership. It's as if the map has shrunk to exactly the size of his footsteps. And that's enough. Do you remember the guard from earlier? The one who asked if Chow believed in karma? He transfers facilities. On his last day, he stops outside Chow's cell. "You don't belong here," he says quietly. Chow doesn't look up. "Everyone belongs somewhere," he replies. The guard leaves. A week later, Chow receives a small envelope, no return address. Inside, a blank card with a single typed line. "You taught me stillness. I'm still learning." He tucks it between the pages of the Book of Five Rings and says nothing. Many people still think that power dies in confinement. But so what do you think? What if true power only becomes visible when nothing else remains? One night during lockdown, a storm hits. The power goes out. The yard floods. The cell block grows restless. Guards tense. Voices rise. But Chow sits cross-legged on his bunk, eyes closed, breathing slowly. When the lights flicker back on, he doesn't move. Because what's one more storm to a man who has already weathered identity, myth, prosecution, and erasure? Later that week, a counselor offers him a new position, tutoring younger inmates formally, maybe teaching a class. Chow considers it, then declines. "I've already said what I needed to," he explains. "They're listening, just not all at once." That night, he writes the final chapter of his manuscript. It doesn't end with a lesson, or a redemption, or an apology, just a memory, a street corner, the smell of soy steam, a boy in worn sneakers stepping into shadow. Not afraid, just aware that the shadow was always going to walk with him. He closes the notebook, seals it in a manila folder, doesn't label it, because if someone's meant to read it, they will, and if not, then it was always just for the silence. The folder sits untouched on the shelf for weeks, not because Raymond Chow has forgotten it. He hasn't. He knows exactly how many pages are inside, the weight of each sentence, the order of thoughts, even the way the paper has slightly curled at the edges from being handled, rewritten again. But he leaves it there, because to send it out would be to finish something. And Chow no longer trusts in finality. Life taught him that nothing ends. It only transforms. Identities, power, truth. Even the strongest name eventually becomes someone else's echo. And so he lets the manuscript sit. Instead, he focuses on smaller rituals. He cleans his cell with obsessive care. Corners swept, sink scrubbed, papers squared at precise angles. He sharpens pencils to a uniform point. He folds letters exactly in thirds. For a man who once navigated chaos, control now exists in these quiet repetitions. And yet, he watches, still pays attention to people, to posture, to the way a guard lingers longer than usual, to how an inmate hesitates before answering a question. Chow sees it all, stores it away, because for Raymond, prison is not a suspension of life. It's a continuation, just slower. Do you remember the Chinese chess set he built from soap and torn calendar cardboard? He spends hours playing alone, or rather, not alone, but against himself. Each side played with the same intensity. When another inmate asks why, he replies, "I don't play to win. I play to remember what it feels like to move." Many people still think isolation breaks men. But so what do you think? What if the ones most dangerous are the ones already used to living in the quiet? There's a rumor, circulating quietly through the inmate grapevine, that Raymond used to command armies with a phone call, that he once made a man disappear with a single word spoken behind a restaurant kitchen. Raymond never confirms or denies. When asked directly, he smiles and says, "People like stories more than truth." That becomes another rumor, that he knows more than he says. But then again, hasn't that always been the case? He begins receiving fewer letters, but the ones that come now are heavier, not in weight, but in content. A former youth center volunteer writes to say thank you. "You told me to listen more. I didn't understand it then. I do now." A former enforcer, now living under a new name in Fresno, writes a longer one. Talks about fatherhood, about how every time his kid gets quiet, he thinks of Chow. "Still waters," he says. "That was you." Raymond responds to that one, briefly. "Stillness is just movement you don't recognize yet." The reply never comes, and that's fine, because not every connection is meant to be held. One evening, while shelving books in the library, he comes across a tattered volume of Chinese poetry. Inside is a poem he hasn't read in decades, written by Li Bai. It speaks of exile, of wine, of the moonlight tracing the shadow of a man who can no longer sleep. He copies a line in his notebook. "We part again and again as the river never rests." That night, his dreams return to the alley in Kowloon, the place where he first watched violence unfold like ritual. But in this dream, there's no blood, no shouting, just the soft echo of footsteps and the feeling of someone watching from behind, waiting to see if he looks back. He doesn't, because even in memory, Raymond walks forward. Mainstream historical fact. In Chinese criminal lore, figures like Chow have often been mythologized into anti-heroes, symbols of order within disorder, men who kept chaos in check even as they quietly profited from it. That tension defines how many in the community still interpret his story. Do you remember the corner store he used to protect? It closed years ago, but the new owner still keeps a red envelope hidden under the counter. Says it was left behind by the old man before he retired. Inside is a folded note. "Don't forget who kept the lights on when no one else cared." No signature, but they all know. Raymond's cell becomes quieter in year 6. Not in volume, but in frequency. Fewer visits, fewer new faces. The world forgets efficiently. Even the infamous become footnotes, but he's okay with that. He once said, "Every empire ends with someone locking the doors and sweeping the floor. Why not be the one who sweeps?" He sweeps now, voluntarily, keeps the block clean, does it without announcement, without seeking credit, just routine, just presence, because that, after all, was his sharpest weapon, presence. And when asked, years later, how he survived everything, the Triad life, the courtroom, the cage, he offers only this: "I didn't try to survive, I tried to remain, and somehow he did." There's a term in old Chinese opera, liu yin, leave the echo, not the voice, not the action, just the echo of it. Something faint, but lingering, something that dances long after the curtain drops. That's what Raymond Chow becomes. Not the central figure anymore, not the headline, but the echo behind the current noise, the rhythm beneath the surface of San Francisco's newer, cleaner Chinatown. The name no longer said aloud, but still understood. A cautionary tale, a half-respected ghost. He doesn't mind. In his cell, the days stretch out like ink on wet paper. Some blur, some smudge. But a few, just a few, settle in with crisp clarity. One such day begins with a letter from Hong Kong, written in careful, practiced Chinese by someone claiming to be the grandson of a man Chow once knew in Kowloon. The tone is respectful, curious. The writer speaks of fragmented stories, whispered legacies, an uncle who said, Raymond Chow once walked through smoke like it was solid ground. At the end of the letter, the young man asks, were you ever afraid? Chow doesn't write back. Instead, he copies the question onto a blank page and leaves it there, unanswered, because fear was never the question. Distance was. Years pass, and like all institutions, prisons change. Guards rotate out. New systems replace old ones. The men Chow once watched grow gray are slowly replaced by faces fresh with either rage or resignation. But he remains, walking the same morning circuit, reading the same old texts, writing less now, but meaning more when he does. Do you remember the essay he titled The Architecture of Control? He revisits it, updates a line. Power is not control. Control is not fear. Fear is just the echo of memory misunderstood. A counselor who reads it in passing asks him if he's still trying to explain himself. Raymond smiles. No, he says. I'm just removing the punctuation. In year 8, something unusual happens. A film student from UC Berkeley reaches out. She's making a documentary, not about him, but about Chinatown's long, complicated relationship with duality, tradition and violence, community and secrecy. She asks for a statement. Raymond doesn't give her one. Instead, he sends her a book of poems. No note, no title page, just the poems, underlined and annotated. Most of them are about rivers. One is about a bridge that no longer leads anywhere. She includes 2 lines in the film, not credited, but unmistakably his. There are men who build walls, and there are men who disappear behind them. The film gains modest attention, wins a local award. Chow hears about it from a new inmate who says, "Hey, I think they quoted you on TV." Chow doesn't respond, just moves his chess piece forward. Mainstream historical fact. Years after his sentencing, Chow's case continues to be studied in criminal justice programs as an example of the gray space between rehabilitation and strategic reinvention. Some see him as a mastermind, others as a mirror reflecting what law enforcement wanted him to be. But in prison, the narrative grows simpler. He becomes known as the quiet one. New arrivals are told not to bother him unless they have something worth saying. And if they do speak to him, they're warned. Don't lie. Because somehow, he always knows. He's not feared anymore, but he's not ignored. Because presence like his doesn't vanish. It just slows. Do you remember the priest who once visited him in year 2? He returns, unexpected, older, softer. They sit for a while, mostly in silence. Before leaving, the priest asks, "Do you still believe in redemption?" Raymond considers this. "I believe in repetition," he says. "Redemption is just repetition someone else approved of." The priest nods, then leaves a prayer book. Chow never opens it, but he keeps it on the shelf, because belief, like legacy, doesn't need proof to exist, just endurance, and endure he does. One winter, he comes down with pneumonia, spends a week in the infirmary. Nothing critical, but enough to remind everyone, including himself, that the clock has always been ticking. That silence, too, grows old. When he returns to his cell, he finds a folded piece of paper on his bunk. No name, just a line written in pencil. "You were the last one who made this place feel organized." He folds it, stores it beneath the mattress. Many people still think that a man's value ends with his influence. But so what do you think? What if some men become most valuable after the world forgets what they looked like? Raymond Chow is no longer trying to be understood. He no longer walks to be seen, no longer speaks to be heard. What remains now is stillness, pure and unfiltered, the kind only age or consequence can teach, and in that stillness, he becomes what he always feared and perhaps secretly longed for, a myth untethered from narrative, not cleared, not condemned, just permanent. By year 9, Raymond Chow's cell has become something of a shrine, not to his past, not to his crimes, but to his pattern. There's a rhythm to how he lives now, one so deliberate that even the guards comment on it. He folds his blanket like it's ceremonial, one says. Another nods. He prays with his silence, but Chow wouldn't call it ritual. He'd call it architecture. A way of holding shape in a place designed to dissolve you. He wakes early, writes with a freshly sharpened pencil, and reads old Chinese proverbs he's long since memorized. But he reads them again, anyway, because memory, like a blade, dulls without repetition. His bookshelf is filled not with stories, but tools, textbooks on sociology, poetry anthologies, an old, annotated copy of the Tao of Pooh that someone mailed him from a bookstore in Portland. His writing shifts too. He begins drafting letters he doesn't send. One to his mother, long gone. One to a man he once protected in prison who later vanished into a transfer. These are not apologies. They're studies, notes on absence, maps of silence. One reads, "We don't remember people. We remember the shape their absence leaves behind." That page he tears out, burns it slowly in the toilet, watches the smoke rise like it's reporting back to a higher power. Do you remember the photo he kept hidden for years? It's a grainy, wallet-sized black and white, taken in 1985. Raymond and a friend, arms slung over his shoulder, both grinning like the world still made room for joy. He stares at it for a long time one night, then folds it once, twice, and tucks it into the spine of a novel. He never looks at it again, because memory is dangerous when it becomes indulgent. Meanwhile, the prison population shifts. New faces, younger men. Some hear whispers about him. Some try to challenge him, testing old blood, hoping to catch a shadow of who he used to be. But Raymond never reacts. He doesn't flinch, doesn't respond. And in that void, something more unsettling grows. Respect. It's not loud, it's not public, but it's real. They begin to greet him differently. Slower, more measured. They stop asking about his past. Instead, they ask about discipline. How do you stay calm? How do you not snap? Don't you miss the streets? To which he responds, always, the streets are still here. They just don't move anymore. Mainstream historical fact. In the final years before his conviction, Chow was known not just for organized crime, but for his uncanny ability to navigate both criminal and civic systems with a politician's finesse. Post-incarceration, that ability translated into leadership within the prison ecosystem, unofficial but undeniable. He becomes effectively a lighthouse. Men don't follow him, they just orient around him. Even the prison chaplain starts citing his phrases during reflection groups. A guard mentions that Chow's thoughts on silence were quoted by his daughter during a college essay. A former rival writes from another facility, offering reconciliation. Nothing left to fight about, the letter says. No winners in memory. Chow doesn't respond, but he folds the letter gently and places it inside a hollowed-out Bible he's been using to store letters he will never send. The Bible isn't symbolic. It's just quiet and space-efficient. Do you remember the boy who once asked him about fear? He writes again. This time older, more grounded. He's joined a community advocacy group in San Jose, helps teenagers with housing insecurity. He thanks Chow not for what he taught, but for what he didn't say. You didn't tell me what to do. You made me listen to my own silence. Chow rereads that letter 3 times, then files it away without comment, because some things are so precise they don't require response. They just land, and he's always been good at landing softly. Many people still think that legacy is about being remembered. But so what do you think? What if it's about being absorbed, like fog, like breath, like the kind of name that never needs repeating, but still makes people sit up straighter? His old manuscript, the chair you never sat in, gets typed and formatted by a volunteer through the prison's education program. It's circulated underground, not published, not leaked, just handed off, page by page, cell by cell, softly. There's no author name, no cover, just text. But everyone who reads it knows this was written by someone who learned how to leave without going anywhere. And in the final page, tucked deep at the end, is a line handwritten by Chow, added after the last edit. Stillness is not surrender, it's survival in slow motion. That quote ends up scrawled across a wall in an LA halfway house. No one knows who put it there, but someone underlines it. By the 10th year, Raymond Chow no longer marks time in days or months. He measures it in the ways people change around him, how their walks slow, how their tempers fade, how even the loudest eventually sit still. Time, he's come to understand, isn't something you pass. It's something that shapes you in the passing. He's not young anymore. His joints ache in the cold. His handwriting has tightened, still legible, still exact, but the loops are less fluid. He speaks less often now, and when he does, people lean in as if listening for a message wrapped in breath. He keeps his routines: morning stretch, meditation, library shift, writing. He still walks the yard, though now he traces a smaller circle, one that favors sunlight when it's there and shade when it's not. Some days he doesn't speak at all, and no one asks why, because by now, Raymond Chow has entered the phase of myth most never live long enough to see. The phase where people quote you without needing you present. A new inmate shows up from Stockton, mid-20s, full of defiance. He tests everyone, tries to spark tension, gets himself written up within a week. One afternoon, he points at Chow in the cafeteria and asks loudly, "What makes this old man so special anyway?" The room goes quiet. No one answers, not even Chow. But the next day, the Stockton kid is sitting alone during rec. Quiet. Writing. Change doesn't happen because you win. It happens because your presence makes losing unthinkable. Raymond teaches no formal class, holds no leadership title, but when a fight almost breaks out over a missed phone slot, it's him they call. Not a guard, not a counselor, just a quiet nod from his seat in the corner, and everything de-escalates. Because some people don't raise their voice, they remove the need for it. Do you remember the old warden? The one who once said Chow believed he was beyond the narrative? He's retired now, but before leaving, he submitted a note to Chow's file. Inmate demonstrates behavior consistent with leadership, discipline, and insight. Potential value as institutional mentor is considerable. His silence is not evasive. It's intentional. The new warden reads that file, then meets with Chow, offers him an official role, facilitating peer-led discussion groups, a modest stipend, longer library access. Raymond pauses before answering, then smiles. "I'm not here to lead," he says. "I'm here to leave fewer bruises behind." He accepts the role anyway. The group meets once a week in a windowless room, 6 folding chairs and 1 stack of worn notebooks. No schedule, no curriculum, just a circle. They talk about guilt, about control, about the kinds of things you can only say when no one's listening for the right answer. One session, someone asks him, "Do you think we can ever change who we are?" Raymond thinks for a long time, then replies, No, but we can change how we carry who we are. The room is silent for a long time afterward. No one writes anything down. Because sometimes, the moment itself is enough. Many people still think that wisdom comes with age. But so what do you think? What if it comes with the long silence after you stop needing to be right? Outside, the world has moved on. The city that once held Chow's shadow now barely remembers his name. New restaurants, new murals, new names on Chinatown's donation plaques. The old photo on Jackson Street, the one tucked behind the cash register, gets taken down during renovations. The new owner doesn't know who the man in the picture was, but they keep the frame empty because it looks important. Meanwhile, Raymond receives a single package. No return address. Inside, a slim book, a collection of essays, his essays, typeset, clean, no author listed, but someone has published it. Tucked in the back is a postscript. This is not yours, but it is because of you. He smiles at that. Then, without fanfare, he places the book on the prison library's miscellaneous shelf. Let the words find who they're meant to find. Do you remember the phrase he once wrote about shadows closing doors? It reappears in a letter from a college student in New York. She's researching Chinatown's criminal history. Found one of his quotes on a community forum. Wants to know if it's okay to use it in her thesis. Chow doesn't reply, but he folds the letter into the center of his notebook and writes one new line under it. If it spoke to you, it's already yours. And that becomes his new philosophy. Not control, not reputation, not even stillness, just release. Let the world make of him what it will. Let his name become dust or story. Because Raymond Chow, the man who once walked behind dragons, now sits in a room where men speak truth without fear of punishment. And maybe that's enough. By the 11th year, even Raymond's breath has cadence. He inhales with intention, exhales with awareness. A man not just alive, but composed. He no longer imagines life beyond the walls. Not out of hopelessness, but out of completion. The outside world doesn't need him, and he doesn't need to be needed. He has refined his purpose into something almost invisible, being quietly useful. The peer-led groups continue, though he rarely says more than a few lines each time. His students, or maybe just his witnesses, have grown used to the silences. They've learned that the pause after a question often holds more than the answer. One young man, just sentenced to 17 years, trembles as he asks, "How do you make peace with what you did?" Raymond tilts his head, then softly replies, "By remembering that guilt is the memory's attempt at rhythm, and peace comes when you stop tapping your foot." The room sits with that. One of them weeps. Raymond doesn't speak again for the rest of the session. He receives fewer letters now, but the ones that come are increasingly strange. People who weren't part of his life, who read his essays past like whispers, who ask him things that don't belong in any court transcript. Do you think evil is a destination or a detour? If a man changes in silence, does the world owe him acknowledgement? What do you regret remembering? Raymond doesn't answer most of them, but he does keep every letter. He stores them in a cardboard box beneath his bunk, labels the box Unsent Echoes. One day, a guard finds the box during inspection, asks what it is. Raymond shrugs. "Proof," he says. "Of what?" "That the world still echoes, even when no one's speaking into it." Mainstream historical fact. As Raymond Chow neared the 12th year of his sentence, a minor documentary about his case was picked up by a streaming service. Though not widely promoted, it sparked a brief online debate about redemption, selective justice, and the blurry line between myth and manipulation. The debate faded, but not for everyone. A university professor begins citing Chow's statements in her lectures on carceral identity. A non-profit in Oakland starts a youth discussion group based on his writings. No one there knows his full story, but they know the phrase, "Stillness isn't surrender." He becomes folklore, not loud, but persistent. Do you remember the essay he titled "The Window Without Glass"? It resurfaces, typed and translated in a Scandinavian journal about criminal philosophy. The author refers to him only as R.C., an American inmate whose silence shaped his sentence. Raymond never learns this. He's too busy rereading the Book of Five Rings again, and not because he seeks strategy, but because he likes the emptiness in its prose, the sharpness without ego. One day, during rec, he's approached by a correctional officer who's transferring soon. The officer thanks him. Raymond asks, "For what?" The man says, "For making me question how I see authority." Raymond just smiles and replies, "That's all authority is, a question people stopped asking." That night, he sharpens his pencil, writes a single line in the back of his journal. "You don't have to raise your voice to raise the ceiling," then closes the notebook. The next day, a small earthquake rattles the building. Nothing major, just tremors. But afterward, several men in the yard joke about the prison shifting, about cracks forming, about the ground remembering its own name. Raymond says nothing, but later, in his cell, he writes, "Sometimes the earth shivers not out of pain, but because it heard something worth remembering." He doesn't explain it. He doesn't need to, because many people still think that a man like Chow sought legacy. But so what do you think? What if the legacy wasn't his, but ours, for how we handled the silence he left? Do you remember the photo album he kept hidden? Photos mailed to him over the years by strangers and past acquaintances? He sends it away to a small community center in Chinatown that still remembers his name, not with fear, but with complexity. He includes a note. This isn't nostalgia. It's evidence that even villains had sunlight. He doesn't expect a reply, doesn't need one. He knows that people will open the box, will sit with the photos, will argue over them, and that's enough, because argument is life. Silence is its shadow, and Raymond has learned to live in both. Raymond Chow's final years behind bars unfold like the last pages of a slow-burning novel, measured, reflective, and quietly potent. He no longer seeks to change the world, nor even explain it. Instead, he observes how time erodes fury, how systems recycle themselves, how even the loudest men eventually run out of things to say. He no longer reads to learn. He reads to feel the weight of words, how syllables land, how pauses expand. He starts underlining strange things, not conclusions, but transitions. Phrases like, "and then," "for a time," "until." He becomes obsessed with what comes after. He stops writing essays, not because he has nothing left to say, but because, perhaps, he's finally said enough. Instead, he writes one-liners, leaves them in margins, tucks them in returned library books. One reads, "We talk about freedom like it's a door, but most people forget to ask who has the key." Another simply says, "You never leave a cage if you still need to be seen." No one knows who's leaving them, but inmates start collecting them, passing them around. Some tape them to walls, some tattoo them onto skin. They call them shrimp lines, a name Raymond would roll his eyes at, but maybe secretly appreciate. One day a parole officer visits. No cameras, no formality, just an offer. "You're eligible, we can build a case." Raymond listens, nods, then asks a single question. "Would I be useful outside?" The officer blinks. "You'd be free." Raymond smiles. That's not the same. He declines, quietly, without bitterness, as if turning down a second dessert, because Raymond understands now he's not trapped. He's in place, like a stone in a garden, chosen, positioned, still. Do you remember the counselor who once said Raymond was a man who wouldn't be moved by time? She retires and sends a letter, a long one. She writes about the men he helped, the the silences he held, the anger he absorbed. She signs it not with thanks, but with confession. I came in thinking you were a criminal. I left thinking you were an anchor. Raymond folds the letter carefully, stores it in a slim envelope labeled, Wait, Mainstream Historical Fact. Even years after his sentencing, Chow's case is cited in law schools, not just for its legal complexity, but for how it blurred lines between prosecution, public narrative, and performance. Some scholars still debate whether his downfall was justice or theater. But inside the walls, the only debate that matters is how a man carries silence. Raymond has stopped teaching sessions. He now listens to younger men who want to talk about mothers, about fear, about the aching hollow of being forgotten. He doesn't interrupt, doesn't guide, just nods, just stays. One man asks if Chow believes in redemption. Raymond says, redemption is just the world trying to explain why it didn't bury you. And the room sits quiet, because no one can argue with that. He starts giving things away, his books, his notes, the wooden chess set he carved with a smuggled nail file. He gives it to a man doing life for a mistake he made at 19. You'll need something that won't betray you, Raymond says. The man tears up, tries to thank him. Raymond just walks away, because true giving doesn't wait for closure. Do you remember the time he traced his life using only names of streets? He rewrites that list one last time. Stockton, Grant, Broadway, Sunset, Harrison, 7th Avenue. Wing, he circles the last one, then crosses it out. Not with bitterness, but with finality. Many people still think you measure a life by where it ends. But so what do you think? What if some lives never end? They just flatten into fables. He spends more time in the yard now, just standing, feeling the sun, watching birds build nests in the fence corners. Guards joke that he's doing philosophy squats. He chuckles. I'm just watching what survives. His final notebook, dog-eared and weathered, has only 3 entries. I am not my legend. I am not my silence. I am the pause between what you expected and what remained. And beneath that, in faint pencil, soon this too will blur. The final days don't come with sirens. No abrupt changes. No dramatic cough in the night. Just slower footsteps. Longer pauses between breaths. The kind of stillness that arrives not as threat, but as permission. Raymond Chow rises one morning and doesn't make his bed right away. Instead, he sits. Not in meditation, not in weariness, just sits. Hands on knees, eyes open, watching the light bend through the narrow window slit. No one disturbs him. They've learned by now that silence is his vocabulary. That week, he gives away the last of his possessions. A ceramic mug he's had for nearly a decade, a sweater someone mailed years ago, 2 pencils, and a small worn book of Tang Dynasty poems that no longer has a front cover. Each item is passed like incense, wordlessly with reverence. One man asks him softly, "Aren't you keeping anything?" Raymond only taps his chest and says, "Just this." The guards don't notice anything unusual. He attends his library shift, drinks his tea, walks his loop in the yard, just slightly shorter than usual, but something shifts. A weight loosens. One night, he's found sitting upright in his bunk. Peaceful, eyes closed. Not gone, just paused. A medical check confirms he's fine. But from that day on, Raymond begins preparing. Not for death, necessarily, but for departure. He organizes his notebooks, labels a few, destroys the rest, leaves a single page behind on the desk in his cell. On it, a final line. I was never looking for absolution, only enough stillness to stop echoing. He eats less, moves less, but somehow his presence grows, becomes dense, becomes gravity. Even men who never knew his past begin to lower their voices around him. They say, he's thinking something deep, or he's listening to something we can't hear. Do you remember the student from New York? She finishes her thesis, wins an award. In her speech, she says, "We often study power as noise, but sometimes it's the quietest figure who holds the shape of history." The room applauds. No one in attendance knows the name Raymond Chow, but they carry his thought forward anyway. Elsewhere, a former rival writes a memoir. One chapter is titled, "The Man Who Never Flinched." It opens with, "He didn't win. He just outlasted our need to punish him." Raymond hears about it weeks later, laughs once, then says to no one, "They always mistake restraint for weakness." One final time, he walks the yard alone. The sky is soft. There's a wind. He stops beneath the single surviving tree, a gnarled thing that somehow, after so many seasons, still insists on greening every spring. He looks up, doesn't say a word, but in that moment, you get the sense that something is being filed away, that the man beneath the tree is not absorbing the world, but releasing it, letting go of every line, every rumor, every fight, every name, even his own. And then quietly, he returns to his cell. That night he sleeps without moving, and in the morning, he wakes, but only to write one final line. "I am not done. I am just no longer necessary." He leaves the paper folded, unsigned, because at that point, everyone already knows who wrote it. So now, here we are, at the soft edge of Raymond Chow's long, quiet descent into legend. Whether you knew him as Shrimp Boy, as a dragon dancer, as an alleged crime boss, or as a man with a sharpened pencil and an even sharper sense of presence, perhaps it's clearer now that none of those labels quite fit. What we're left with isn't just a man, but a pattern, a rhythm, a slow exhale through the bars of memory. Let your mind ease back now. Think of the echo his silence left behind in courtrooms, in cells, in coffee shops, in student papers, in the way someone might pause before speaking out of turn. There's a gentleness in that pause, a reverence, a truth that doesn't need to shout. The world rarely honors its quiet architects, but perhaps Raymond never needed honoring, just understanding. So close your eyes now, if they're not already. Feel the coolness of the night, the soft buzz of a fan or distant hum. Let your breath match that rhythm, steady, unhurried, unburdened. There's no need to solve him, no need to judge, no need to justify anything that came before. Just let it drift. Let every sharp edge fade into dusk. Let every headline melt back into wind. You've walked the long road beside a man who folded noise into silence and wore that silence like armor. Rest easy now. The story has slowed. The pages have settled, and wherever he is, if he is anywhere at all, Raymond Chow is no longer watching. He's waiting.